Hello and welcome to the 4th episode of the Eternal Top 10 series. In this series I will talk about the 10 cards with the most competitive success in Eternal's history that fulfill a certain condition. In this case they have to cost 8 or more power. For that I compiled a list of all decks that topped an official DireWolfDigital event or that reached top 8 in the ETS seasons of 2017 and 18. The ranking is then based on a point system. Each tier 1 top grants 2 points and each tier 2 top grants 1. The tiers are either based on how far the deck went or on how important the event was. For a more detailed explanation, check out the introduction video on my channel. Today we are looking at cards that cost 8 or more power. Cards that cost that much have become harder and harder to justify over the years because more and more strong cheap cards got released and made the game faster, especially in Throne. That means a card this expensive needs to either win the game on the spot, have a good way to be cheated out for less power, or have some kind of useful alternative effect that costs less. The following list will have cards from each of these three groups, and some cards that had a heyday in a time or format in which expensive cards didn't need to be quite as good. We start with Kairos Grand Champion. He's a 9 power, triple fire and triple time influence 12/12 legendary unit. He grants 6 maximum power. On summon he draws cards equal to the highest attack among your other units, and when you play another unit, it deals damage equal to its attack to an enemy. He got released in Z7, Flame of Sulta, shortly before the start of the 2020 season. He didn't see a lot of success in Expedition that year, mostly because Praxis and its 3 faction combinations were pretty bad outside of FTS sacrifice decks, which Kairos just didn't fit in. He had a very successful 2020 Throne season though. At the start of it, he was played in FTJ and Praxis midrange decks, mostly as a late game win condition out of the market. Towards the end of that season he was used in a less fair way though. Xenon and FTF's Talia decks played him in the market to OTK with Talia plus a way to enter the market. You would play Talia, then either play a Merchant front hand, draw one from the void with Dark Return and get it played for free because of Destiny, or play a time matchings on Talia. That way you would get Kairos from the market, get him played for free because of Destiny, and draw at least as many cards as Talia at attack, usually 6, and each time unit drawn would be played for free and draw another card immediately because Talia didn't have a restriction back then. Usually you could kill the opponent immediately because each unit played dealt damage equal to its attack thanks to Kairos, but even if you couldn't OTK you would win most times because of the card advantage gained. That combo got killed by a nerf to Talia in late 2021, but Kairos continued to top occasionally in Eccentric Officer, Fair Exchange and Summoner 7 combo decks. So it was only really played fairly until mid-2020 and almost always cheated out in different ways afterwards. On rank 9 we have Svetya, Merciful Loreen. She's an 8 power, triple justice influence 6/6 legendary unit with Aegis, and on summon each justice unit in your deck gets +6/+6 and Aegis. She was released in the middle of the 2019 season in the Homecoming campaign and had an immediate impact in the market of justice midrange decks like Rakano Valkyries and Horo Flyers, because she allowed you to outgrind other midrange and control decks. Her best season came in 2020, where she was played in the market of a wide array of justice midrange decks, most importantly Archimport Magdo, Rakano Valkyries and Archimport Kira. She was never cheated out like most other units on this list, which made it harder to justify playing her over time, but Compre and Archimport midrange still occasionally played a copy in the market in 2021 and 2022. Ramp effects like Enter the Monastery, which used to cost 3 power, Last Scroll and Icaria Valkyrie Captain could help you to get the 8 power faster, because waiting till turn 8 or even longer was too slow against most meta decks of that time. Next up we have the first non-unit, Sword of the Psyking, which was released in Z1. It is an 8 power double justice influence 8/8 legendary relic weapon without any other effect. Similarly to Svetya, it was never cheated out in competitive lists. But in contrast to Svetya, it wasn't good enough to win games completely on its own most of the time, so it got worse when the game became faster. Additionally, it struggled with the release of main deckable Relicate like Sabertooth Brightleader or Garden of Omens, and because the release of Merchants and Smugglers in 2018 and 19 led to efficient Relicate like Boar or Calyp's Choice being more available. All that led to it fading out of play in 2020 except for a few expedition tops in Z8 Campri Relics, but it had a strong showing in the 2 ATS seasons of 2017 and 18. It was mostly played as a 1 or 2 off and more often than not delegated to the sideboard before merchants came out. The decks that played a copy in the main deck, like FGS Armory, FTJ midrange, Rakano midrange and FGP Control, usually played Rise to the Challenge to tutor it out when necessary. In 2018 it made more main deck appearances in decks like Archenport midrange, TGP Control and FGS midrange, but it dropped off hard in 2019 and couldn't top a single Throne event from 2020 onwards. Rank 7, Scourge of the Frostholm, was released in Z1 as well, but in contrast to Sword of the Psyking it had its best season in 2020. It's a 10 power triple primal influence 8/8 legendary unit that prevents the enemy player from playing any spells. Scourge only saw sporadic play in the 2 ETS years as a one-off in Feln and TGP Control, both of which could search it with Celestial Omens. In 2019 it found a consistent home in the market of Horror Control decks though, but the biggest success came in 2020, where it was part of the market of Horror Skycrack and FGP Control, the latter of which it won Worlds with. Additionally, it was played in the market of a few midrange decks and in the main deck of some even-handed golem decks, mainly Kilo versions, which could tutor it out with their namesake card. In the 2 following seasons the play rate of Scourge dropped quite a bit, but it still made a showing in control markets. And it also got incorporated in combo decks like 4-faction Eccentric Officer and FTP Summoner 7 decks as a unit to cheat out early. On rank 6, we finally have a newer card again, Cruel Xumik Occultist. She's an 8 power 7/7 legendary unit, and when she damages a player while you have at least 2 Shadow Influence, she plays a unit with cost equal to or lower than the damage dealt from the void of the damaged player, exhausted. Her Fate effect can trigger the effect because it deals damage to you equal to your remaining power. So if you draw Cruel, you take damage equal to your open power, which allows you to immediately play a unit from your void that costs that much or less power. Cruel came out in set 10, Empire of the Class, right between the 2020 and 2021 seasons. Even though she couldn't prove her strength in official tournaments for the first few months of her existence, DireWolfDigital deemed her too strong and added an influence requirement because decks like Koro, Kira and Elysian Spells played her even though they had to give up insignias for it, which proves how strong she really was. That influence gate nerf restricted her to shadow decks, but her strong performances in 2021 proved that she was still a very powerful card. Her most important home in Throne was the FPS Praxis Trove deck. The namesake card of the deck, Praxis Trove, used to not have a once per turn restriction, which allowed the deck to go for chains like playing a 1-drop unit, which would know when to hold them from the deck because it was the only 1-cost spell, which could either draw Cruel to revive a 2-drop from your void, or draw Broken Contract, which plays a 2-drop, and both of which could trigger Praxis Trove again to play a 2-cost spell from your deck like Devour or Defile. The deck also sometimes played Whispering Wind, which could tutor out Cruel by discarding a 3-drop because the list with Wind usually didn't play any other card that costs more than 3 in the main deck. After that deck got nerfed, Cruel took a little bit to find a new home, but in mid-2021 she became a market staple in the very successful Stonescar Seal deck. That deck usually played 8 to 12 ways to access the market, so you could swap Cruel around multiple times throughout a game. You could also use plunder effects, like Seal or Exploit, to make use of her in the hand after you used her Fate effect already. In Expedition she was played in a deck similar to FPS Trove, but without that namesake card because it wasn't part of the format. That deck had different variants, but all of them used Know When to Hold Them and Whispering Wind to get consistent access to Cruel. Additionally, she was played in TPS and Xenon Mandrake decks, the first of which also usually played Wind and Know When. The second nerf to play the unit exhausted in late 2021 was rough, but she was still a good card and continued to see play in Stonescar Seal markets. Next up we have Martyr's Chains. It's a 9-power quadruple justice influence legendary relic that doubles the stats of all your units at the end of your turn, and on Empower you can kill an enemy unit. It was released in Z5 Defiance right before the 2019 season, on which it had a huge impact. It was a staple for all kinds of Justice midrange and control decks, most importantly FGS, Compre and Horror Midrange and Horror Control. FGS and Horror Midrange usually played it in the market, while the other two played between 1 and 3 copies in the main deck. There was also one deck that tried to cheat it out with Governor Sahin's effect, but the deck only got 2 tops and all the other decks used Chain in a fair way. The nerf towards the end of the 2019 season led to a significantly lower play rate in the following years, but Chain still showed up occasionally in Compre Relics and Horror Midrange and Expedition, and in the market of Compre Relics, Compre Midrange and Archenport Midrange and Throne. On rank 4 we have another set 1 card and the only spell on this list, Channel the Tempest. It's a 9 power quadruple primal influence rare spell that draws 3 cards and then deals damage equal to the number of cards in your hand. It was a very important finisher and value option for control and sometimes midrange decks in 2017 and 2018. In 2017 it was mostly played in Fel control, which could usually search it with Celestial Omen, and in TGP Chalice decks, and in 2018 it got most of its tops from Fel control again and TGP control, but it also was played in a number of other decks that I can't name all here. The nerf from 8 to 9 power at the end of 2018 reduced its play rate quite a bit in 2019, in which it only got 4 tops in Horror Control, but it rose back in 2020 and 2021. In 2020 Throne it was played in the market or as a one-off in Skycrack, Horror and FGP Control, the latter of it won Worlds with again. Both Skycrack and FGP played Garden of Omens in the main deck, so they could search their 1 copy of Channel with Resurface. In 21 Throne it was played in those same decks and in Feln at any cost control combo-ish decks, but it began to fade out more and more. In Expedition it saw some play in 2020 control and Worldpire decks, but its time to shine came in 2021 as a recursion target for Davia Azure Breaker, often in combination with Shorthopper to dump it from the market in the void to then recur it with Davia. In 2022 a few TGP control decks played it as well in Expedition. On rank 3 we have Asindel Revealed. He's an 8 power 7/7 legendary double time, double shadow influence unit that plays 2 deadly unblockable 1/1s on summon, and each time one of your units hits the enemy you get to draw the top card of the deck with its cost reduced by 2. He was released in the Into Shadow campaign towards the end of 2018 and immediately topped some ETS events and FTS midrange and FTS Grenadine decks. In 2019 he became an integral part of Feln Reanimator. That deck tried to mill Farah, Fate Touched, Asindel and other big shadow units like Black Sky Harbinger, and then revived them all in one big chain with Grasping, because Vara used to trigger each time a shadow unit was played, not just once per turn. So if Vara played an Asindel, the 2 Heliki, which used to be shadow units, would trigger Vara again and you could revive even more units. Additionally he saw play in Xenon and FTS midrange and TGS Tale combo decks. He continued to see success in Feln Reanimator in 2020, but most of his points in that year came from different shades of Xenon. At the start of 2020 he was played in the market of some Xenon Stranger decks, and after Set 9 came out in the middle of the year, he was played as a target for Wasteland Broker in the market of even Xenon midrange decks and even FTS Vox decks. All those decks died out towards the end of 2020, but he found a continuous home in the aforementioned Xenon and FTS Tali decks, at least until Tali got nerfed again in late 2021, and in Xenon midrange and the main deck of Xenon Katra. All decks mentioned so far, except for Feln Reanimator and occasionally Xenon Katra, tried to play him in a fair way, but he also saw some play in decks that could cheat him out with cards like Fair Exchange, Kilobolt Innovator or Worldpire. Stormheart Plating is our second place. It's an 8 power quadruple justice influence 6/8 legendary relic weapon that allows you to attack twice each turn. It also has Inscribe, and if you inscribe it, which means playing it as a depleted justice sigil, you get 2 armor. That flexibility made it playable in both formats despite its high cost, because against faster decks you could always play it as a power and gain some life in the process, and it was also a generally good way to not get power screwed. It was released in Z12 Cold Hunt at the end of the 2021 season, and even though it only had 2 tournaments performed in that year, including the World Championship Finals, which has less decks added, it was able to rack up an impressive 27 points in that year alone. In Throne it was played in the main deck of Compre Midrange, Compre Equalize, and in one FGS Armory list. And in Expedition it was played in a wide array of Justice midrange and control decks, most importantly Archenport and Horror midrange, and Horror Heroes and Horror Control. It continued its success in 2022 in both formats. In Throne it profited from the resurgence of Archenport or FGS Minotaurs, thanks to the release of Black Book Pit Boss, and thanks to its synergy with Tough Rod Auric Banker, because it was of course a weapon that Tough Rod could draw with his attack effect. Additionally, it was a main deck staple in Archenport and Compre Midrange, Compre Equalize, and Horror Control. In Expedition it continued to see play in Horror Midrange and Control and in TGP Control. It was also played in Archenport Minotaurs, Compre Midrange, and a wide array of other Justice midrange decks that I can't name all of here. Now for our honorable mentions. First up we have Mollard and Nakoba. Mollard barely missed out on being the only dragon representation on this list. He was a crucial part of Skycrack Canadians in 2018 and 2019. That deck tried to use Combustion Cell and Cheap Grenadines to activate the tribute effect on Kenna Shaman of the Scale for big value spells like End of Hostilities. Mollard was a strong finisher that you could ramp into with Cell and copy with End of Hostilities. Additionally, he was played in FTP midrange in 2019 and in some Skycrack Dragon decks in 2020 Expedition. Next up we have Aid of the Horror. It is the go-to spell if you want to cheat out spells. In the ETS seasons it was occasionally played as a top end in TGP Control and Chalice decks, because those could let games go long enough and ram into it. But from 2020 onwards it was mostly played in decks that had ways to play it for less power. In Throne it only got a few tops in 5-faction Worldpire decks in 2020. And in Expedition it was played in a few fair control decks, but it got most of its point from 2020 Worldpire decks again, and 2022 TGB control decks, which played discard effects like Talk of Wars to discard Aid of the Horror and then recur it with Davia Azure Breaker. Although they could also cast it naturally if the game went long enough. Next up we have Valiant Guardian. He would have easily made the list if he didn't get a severe nerf only 4 months after his release in Z11 Revelations. On release he still had Overwhelm, and he increased the cost of the enemy spells by 4 instead of just 2. That allowed him to quickly rake up points in Expedition Praxis and Xenon midrange decks, and in Throne in Xenon and Mono Time midrange, Xenon Talia combo decks, Compre Equalize, and TGP Fire Exchange combo decks. After his severe nerf he stopped seeing play completely though. And lastly have Talia, who sees beyond. She only saw play in combo decks built around using her Destiny effect. I already talked about a version with Kairos earlier, but there was also a version before Kairos came out. In 2018, those decks were just Xenon and played as few non-unit and non-power cards as possible, so that Talia, in combination with Vodaka and Temple Staffer, could draw most of your deck. In 2019, the deck added some Justice cards and Justice power cards of course, including one copy of Grinwa, Judge of Battles, who was used to kill the opponent by playing him after your combo by killing your Vodakhan because you had a full board, and Vodakhan's huge stats would be enough to kill the opponent with Grinwa's effect. That version got replaced with the Kairos version in 2020, and Talia stopped seeing play after the nerf to her current form in late 2021. And on rank 1 we have Vara Fate Touch, the only original Scion to make the top 10. She's an 8 power triple Shadow Influence 6/6 legendary unit with Deadly, and when you play your first Shadow unit each turn, including herself, she plays a Shadow unit from your Void and grants it Void Bound. Vara was a staple in Fel midrange and Control, which usually played 1 to 3 copies of her between main deck and sideboard, and which also played Celestial Omen again to search her. And in Stonescar midrange before she got nerfed for the first time in early 2018. Not being able to trigger her effect herself made her unplayable, but it was reversed in early 2019, which made Fein Reanimator a strong contender throughout the 2019 and early 2020 Throne season. Additionally, she was played in Scene and Katra, basically the successor of Fan Reanimator from mid-2020 until her nerf in 2022, and in some Kilo Reanimator decks that could tutor her up with the namesake card after sacrificing something like a Carved Solar Dragon, which she could immediately revive again, and then she could even recur another unit in her pre-nerf form, thanks to the Cultist from Carved being a shadow unit, similar to the Asindel chains I mentioned earlier that you used in Fan Reanimator. The nerf in late 2022 made her chains impossible and put a stop to her competitive success in Throne. But lastly, I have to mention her immense success in her only expedition season in 2020, which she got almost half of her points in. Set 7 expedition had 2 Shadow tier 0 decks in a row, first Scene and Cultist and then Archimport midrange, and Vara was a staple in the market and occasionally main deck of both of them. Carved was one of the strongest cards in that format and Vara worked very well with him. Like I already mentioned, you could revive a Carved and then the Cultist from Carved would immediately revive another unit with Vara. But even just recurring a good mid-range unit like Taspu or Incarnus was a very strong late game play in that format. In addition to Scene and Cultist and Archimport midrange, she was also played in Stonescar midrange, Stonescar Dragons and TGS control and a few other decks that got like 1 or 2 tops. This marks the end of the 4th episode of the Eternal Top 10 series. You can find the introduction video and all of the previous episodes on my channel. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Have a nice week.